Mr. Ledbetter. His name was Otis Ledbetter. And there was a commercial on television at the time, Big Otis. So we behind his back called him Big Otis because he was big and tough. And remember, he met with me and told me, he said, listen, doesn't your father work for the Department of Corrections? And I said, yes, he does. I know your dad, and I'm going to keep him informed on what you do this year. And I thought, oh no, this is going to be bad. So I knew I was going to have to straighten up because everything I did, my dad's going to hear about it. And Big Otis was tough too. Every time you misbehaved, he had a big long paddle with holes drilled in it. I got more paddlings than you can believe. Each time I got a paddling, my dad gave me another beating when I got home. So I had to straighten up. I remember one day Mr. Ledbetter came through the dining hall, and we were having pinto beans that day. And he is always on me about being such a lazy kid. Didn't want to work, didn't want to do anything. And he looked right at me, and everybody else was sitting there, and he said, we had pinto beans and onions and cornbread that day. And he said, eat those beans, they'll put you to work. Everybody started laughing at me. I was so embarrassed. Never will forget that. And but I did okay. He talked to my dad every week. My dad would come home and I'd have to answer for all the things I'd failed to do. But I started doing better. And I remember I went on to the 7th grade at Marion Junior High School. And I had this young teacher who had just graduated from Appalachian. And I wanted to please her, so I studied extra hard for her. And my grades started improving. And then the next year I had Mr. Greenlee. And he was a good teacher, an interesting teacher, and I studied real hard under him. I tried to please him. And I remember I went on to high school in I remember when Kennedy was assassinated. Let's talk about that. I think I was in the 8th grade at Marion Junior High. I was sitting out on the front steps of the Marion Junior High School, right on the front there, waiting on the school bus to come. And someone came out and said the president has been assassinated. And I thought, oh my gosh, I was so upset. I mean, he was the future. I mean, everything was looking bright, and our president's been shot. And I was so upset that I said, I'm not even going to wait for the school bus to pick us up. I'm going to walk on home. And so I started walking. And I remember walking down by the community building there, and I went by the Little Buck Grill. I think I cut through the parking lot where Ingles Supermarket used to be, and I walked down that way down, and then south down by Little Buck Grill, and I saw the people in the restaurant eating, and they were all crying. People were sitting in the restaurant drinking coffee and crying about the president. And I went right by the community center and on down home. Finally made it home. When I got home, Mom and Dad were sitting there, and Dad said, our president's dead. And Mom and Dad were both crying. That was such a sad day. For the next 5 days, all you could see on television was the reports of the president and the assassination. And Lee Harvey Oswald getting killed. First shooting on live television. And my goodness, that was something terrible, something to stand out in my mind the rest of my life. And then after that, after Johnson took over, he said we would do our best and continue on. And I thought Johnson was a pretty good president. And he got elected, I believe, in '64. Dan K. Moore was elected governor of North Carolina in '64. I remember Dan K. Moore's slogan was, "We're looking for more in '64." And there were all kind of jokes about that. This lady said, "We got 4 children and we're looking for more in '64." All kinds of jokes made about that slogan. But Dan K. Moore served the governor of North Carolina for 4 years. And then the next election was in, I guess it was '68. Johnson refused to run again, and Nixon was elected president. Spiro Agnew vice president. Bob Scott was elected governor of North Carolina. And I graduated from high school in '68. And didn't know what I wanted to do, but I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. So I started Appalachian in the fall of '68. And my advisor said, well, if you want to go to law school, you need to be a political science major. So I didn't know what I was doing, but I majored in political science. I always did like politics. And I enjoyed studying about it. So I enjoyed my years at Appalachian studying political science. And so I graduated in '72 and went right into graduate school. I wanted to go to law school, but didn't have the money to pay for it. I couldn't find funding. I was a poor boy. I'd used about all my resources, borrowed about all I could to get my bachelor's degree. And the chairman of the political science department was Richter H. Moore, good Democrat. He told me that he had a funding that he could help me if I wanted to go on to graduate school. And he said, I'll help you out this summer by getting you a summer internship. And with this summer internship, you will do a land use study, and we'll work with you and help you with that. You'll have another research assistant will be working with you, and you will have secretaries, and you just do your report, and you'll be working under me. I'll be supervising this. We'll let you know what you need to do. So I said, well, that sounds great. They were going to pay me to do it. And I would get credit, graduate credit. I believe I got 6 semester hours for doing that. And so I went to Linville Falls and I did a land use study. And the purpose of the study is they wanted me to do a complete intensive house-to-house survey of the entire community. And I had to design a questionnaire to give to every household and to find what their hopes and plans and what they would like to see happen in their community over the next few years, how they would like to see it grow and develop. And we had to do cartography, we had to do land maps of every household and everything, and we had to do charts, and we had to do all kinds of things. We wrote that thing up, got it printed up, and I made an A. I was just tickled to death for this study. And as a result of the study, the community of Linville Falls, they went to the General Assembly, and they petitioned the General Assembly to get laws passed to where there wouldn't be any development there in Linville Falls. They were afraid that if they did not do this, that industry would come in and destroy the land and the natural beauty of their area. And so that's what our study documented, the need for this and the people's desire for this to be done. And so it was a pretty good study. I had a lot of fun that summer. They paid my room and board there in Linville Falls. They bought my meals. They paid my gas. And then I got college credit for it. I think I was making something like $20 a day for each day I was there. and it was a good deal. $20 in 1972 was a lot of money. And so I finished that land use study, and then I believe Nixon was reelected, and Hauser was elected the first Republican governor of North Carolina that fall. And that was big news because that was the first governor since Reconstruction that was a Republican in North Carolina. And I knew Hauser. He was from Boone. Republican. He was a good guy. He wasn't like these tea baggers today. Different type of guy. He was more progressive. And he had been the president of the I can't remember, some group, but that's where he got prominence. He was also an attorney there in Boone, had a practice there. His building, where his offices were upstairs, and underneath his offices was a restaurant, the Alpine House. And so when I went back to school that fall, I got a job at the Alpine House working in the Hauser building. And I was fixing food. It was a sandwich shop, really. They had kosher hot dogs and all kinds of snacks and quick meals for college students. And I worked there. It was I'd go in about 6 o'clock and work till 10 o'clock, about 3 days a week. And it was some extra money while I was going to graduate school. And so I went on to graduate school, was working as, I got a graduate teaching assistantship. It was helping pay my way. I was teaching introduction to politics, and I taught state and local government. And I was getting paid to do that while I was taking my classes. Plus I was working at the Alpine House at night. And so things just continued on. And on June the 16th of 2003, Donna and I had been dating for about a year or so, a little over a year. We decided we were going to get married. And I was still in graduate school. She had graduated. She graduated in 1973. So June 16th, 1973 was our wedding. We decided to get married at Price Park on the Blue Ridge Parkway. What a beautiful place. We got married in the amphitheater there at Price Park. And we honeymooned in Williamsburg, Virginia. I remember we just bought a Ford Pinto. It was a 72 Ford Pinto. And this man had bought the car for his wife, brand new. It was just a few months old. And she didn't like it. Didn't have enough power. So she wanted something bigger and faster. So she turned it back into the Ford place, and so I bought it from the Ford place. It was like a new car. It had almost no miles on it. And I got a real buy on that thing. $1,700 for almost a brand new car. $1,700. And I thought it was a great deal. Best car I'd ever had. I'd always had junk cars before. I'd owned a 60 model Volvo, which was worn out when I got it. And here I had a brand new car. I was tickled to death with it. We drove that car from Boone to Williamsburg, Virginia, where we honeymooned. What a trip. And spent a few days in Williamsburg, Virginia. And then came back home. And I was a summer intern with the North Carolina Department of Corrections. And I worked at the Watauga unit. So that I was making $20 a day again. Plenty of money for that day and era. We got by fine on it. And so I finished out the summer internship at the Department of Corrections, and then went back to school that fall. The first time I'd been out of school. And so I took the rest of my classes in my graduate master's degree, and the plan was that when I graduated, I would go to work teaching at a community college. That was gold. And so I graduated in February. I finished all my classwork up in February. All of my co-students had the rest of the year to finish out. They just continued on taking classes. But I finished early. I'd taken extra classes, and the internships had counted, I believe I got a total of 12 hours graduate studies for doing those internships. One was a land use study, and one was with the Department of Corrections. And so after I graduated, I thought I'll have a good job in no time, and I just started putting out applications and resumes and letters, and I was doing that, and I got a job working at the Bavarian Inn to earn a little extra money. So I was working there as a cook at the Bavarian Inn on campus. I did that for several months until school ended. And when school ended at the end of spring semester, the Bavarian Inn closed up for the summer. They didn't stay open all summer. They just closed up. So I didn't have a job. And I needed a job because I couldn't find a real job. I was trying to get a job that I was trained for to teach at a community college. I put in applications at every community college in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia, and wasn't getting anywhere. I finally got an interview with a community college on the coast of North Carolina, in Supply, North Carolina. Went down there and interviewed, and they wasn't very impressed with me because they hired one of my classmates from Appalachian. Old Vince Green got that job. Don't know whatever happened to Vince. I didn't hear from him after that. But I continued until it didn't look like I was ever going to get a job, so I started going, putting in applications at factories and everything else. And so in sometime in May, we decided to do a trip down to Winston-Salem, and we stayed at Donna's parents there in Winston-Salem, and I just went around and put in applications at RJ Reynolds, Western Electric, Schlitz Brewery. I went everywhere, but just trying everything. I didn't care. I needed a job. And as I was driving by, I happened to see State Department of Correction. I thought, well, shoot, I did an internship with the State Department of Correction, and my father worked with the State Department of Correction as a correctional officer. I sure don't want to work for the Department of Correction. My dad always told me he'd beat the you-know-what out of me if I went to work for him. But I was desperate for a job. So I saw the sign that said Forsyth Advancement Center. And I just pulled up in there, went in, and asked to speak to the superintendent. And they said he'll be with you in just a few minutes. So it was just a cold, what do you do, on the spur of the moment deal. I talked to the superintendent. His name was Mr. Jack Turlington. I'll never forget. And Jack said, well, Mr. Cox, I'm impressed by I had my resumes and everything. I'm impressed by your credentials, and looked like you'd be an excellent employee, and I wish I had something, but I don't have any openings. However, I know a fella by the name of C.D. Bobby Vernon up in Rockingham County. He's got an opening. Now, he's a real SOB and hard to work for, and nobody wants to work for him. But if you need a job, you might ought to consider going up there and talking to him. So I said, well, shoot, I need a job, and I think I can work for anybody. I don't care who they are. And as long as it's honest work. So I said, well, could you call him and find out when he'd like to talk to me? He said, sure. So he called him up, and Vernon said, come on up there. He'd be glad to talk to me. And so I asked Mr. Turlington, I said, where in the world is Rockingham County? I've never been there, never heard of it. And he told me how to get there. So Donna and I decided, we got in the car and we headed toward Rockingham County. What an adventure. We went out Highway 158. I thought it was pretty country, beautiful drive. Piedmont. Just as we got almost in Rockingham County, there was a little beer joint. The name of it was the Dewdrop Inn. I'll never will forget that. We didn't stop. Didn't think it'd be appropriate to stop prior to a job interview, but we went on and we made it to the Rockingham County Department of Correction, and there was old Bobby Vernon there, C.D. Bobby Vernon. He, Mr. Turleton had faxed him my resumes, my state application, and everything. He had all that stuff. And he said, I've been looking at your credentials here. You got some pretty good credentials. And he said, I like the fact that your dad worked for the Department of Corrections, so you know about us and know how we operate. And he said, I like the fact that you were a summer internship at the Watauga unit. And he said, I contacted the superintendent up there in Boone, and he speaks very highly of you. And I'd like to hire you, but you got too much education. I know if I did hire you, you wouldn't stay with me. I said, oh yeah, I need a job. He said, well, let me think. I guess I could hire you, allow you to put some food on the table and pay some bills, but I know you ain't going to stay with me. But let me see about it. He said, I'm going to have to see what I can do. I got to get this approved through personnel and everything, and I'll get back in touch with you. Well, I'd heard that before. I'll get back in touch with you. I didn't expect to ever hear any more from him. So I went back home, drove back to Boone, went back to work at the Holiday Inn as a morning chef, and I was just continuing to send out resumes and letters. And on a Friday evening, about a month later, I'd forgotten all about Rockingham County. I got a phone call, and it was Bobby Vernon. He said, are you still interested in that job? I said, well, yeah. And he said, well, if you're interested in it, be here at 8 o'clock Monday morning then. I said, okay. But what I was thinking about is, how in the world, I don't own any furniture. The apartment I'm living in is furnished. All I got is a 72 model Ford Pinto. No furniture. Just barely making enough money to buy groceries and keep the lights on, pay the rent. And I got a Visa card from NCMB with a $500 limit on it. Of course, I kept that paid up every month. When the bill came, I paid it up. Never let it get over due. Never had to pay interest on it because I paid it in time each month. Well, we got in the car and drove down to Winston-Salem, spent the night with Donna's parents. Never will forget. sat out on the back porch and watched television out in the cool air. And I was apprehensive about this, what we were going to do in the morning, because been offered a job but didn't know where we were going to live. So we got up the next morning and drove to Eden. I'd looked over Reidsville. I wasn't impressed. I didn't like Reidsville. It was a dirty town. Didn't want to live there. And someone told me that Eden was a nicer town. So we drove to Eden, to the Carolina Exxon on Washington Street, right beside the Eden Daily News. And there was a Eden Daily News paper vending machine. And I paid 10 cents and got a paper, and looked at the apartments. And we found there was an apartment on Highway 700, Harefield Apartments. Furnished apartment. $130 a month. We drove over to Harefield Apartments, talked to Mamie Harrison, her name is Mamie Harefield. Mamie Harefield, who was the wife of the owner. They owned it. She took us and showed us the apartment. Small, furnished, a bedroom, bathroom, kitchen, living room. That's all it was. Small, upstairs. I wasn't all that impressed, but I thought, well, maybe this will get us started. And Donna definitely was not impressed, because it was upstairs. She said, "You kidding me? We got to climb these stairs." And she said, "I don't like it." I said, "Donna, it'll just be temporary till we can figure out what else to do." She said, "Okay." So we got it. $130 a month. Heat was included. We had to pay the water bill and the electric bill and get the phone turned on. And Duke Power wanted more money than I had to turn on the electricity. So I called up Vernon, told him that I'd found a Harefield Apartments, but didn't have the money to get the lights turned on. The Duke Power wanted, I believe they wanted a $150 deposit. I didn't have it. Vernon said, "I'll take care of that. I know the people at Duke Power." And so he made a phone call, and they turned on the lights, and I didn't have to pay the deposit. And he said, "Now you need a phone. You work for the Department of Correction. You could be called in 24 hours. I'll call the phone company, tell them to hook up your phone." Well, I didn't have a deposit for that either. They hooked up my phone. So he helped me out, helped us get started. And Vernon was a tough guy to work for. He didn't take any foolishness. Hard taskmaster. But as long as you tried to do the right thing, he was okay. He'd treat you right. He ever found out that you wasn't doing the right thing, buddy, you in a deep trouble. But I did okay with him and worked for him for several years until he decided to run for sheriff. And after he left and became sheriff, he had a long, illustrious career as the sheriff of Rockingham County. Had a very successful career as a sheriff. Was very well respected throughout the state. And so I learned a lot from him. But all during this time, I felt that I could do better, and I should be able to do better. Never really satisfied with the job I was doing, although it was a good job, good insurance, good benefits. Being a state employee had a lot of advantages, but the pay just wasn't that great. And I felt with a master's degree, I should be able to do something else. I applied for every promotion that came up. I took every exam, every training they gave, but they never would consider me for anything else. I guess they just figured that I was where I needed to be. And one of the superintendents after Vernon became sheriff told me, he said, well, why in the world would we promote you? We couldn't get anybody to do your job as well as you do. And I thought, man, they're, instead of rewarding me for doing a good job, they're keeping me here. So I was always looking for something else, something better. And in May of 1987, I finally got the opportunity to go to work with Vocational Rehabilitation. I didn't have a degree in counseling, but they told me that they would train me if I would be willing to go to school to get the training. So I took the job with Vocational Rehabilitation, and they got it worked out to where I could take graduate level training to finish, to get my master's degree in rehabilitation counseling. So I took those courses while I was working. State of North Carolina paid for every penny. Tuition, fees, books, everything. And I got my master's in rehabilitation counseling, and then I took the test and became a certified rehabilitation counselor. It's a national credential test for national rehabilitation counselors. And not a whole lot of them did that back then, but I had the ambition. I thought, shoot, if I'm going to do this, I want to be the top of the line. So certified rehabilitation counselor was the gold standard for rehabilitation counselors. And as a result of getting that, the state gave me a big raise. I was the top of the pay grade for rehabilitation counselors. And because of that, I was making more money than a lot of my supervisors. And they didn't appreciate that. Matter of fact, my unit manager, who was over the several VR offices, he just had a bachelor's degree. He didn't have a master's degree. He didn't go back and get that master's when they offered it. And I was making more money than he was, and he was supervising several VR offices. He hated my guts because I was making more money than he was. That just tore them up. And so I didn't, for some reason, management started looking down on me because I had done better than, I guess I was a threat to them, I don't know. The guys that hired me and everything, I always got along well with them. I was top notch with them until they retired, and this new guy come along, and that's when my downfall started. But anyway, I finally did my 30 years and got out of there. But never did get promoted like I thought I should have. Maybe I just had too much ambition. I don't know. I was a threat to all the other people. They thought I would get their job, I guess is what it was. But anyway, throughout my life, I've loved communications. I've loved ham radio. As a kid, my dad bought me a set of hand phones, old telephones that had been discarded. And I rigged up telephone wires throughout the woods at our house there on Valley Street. And talked. We'd set up army posts and talk back and forth to each other. Travel us throughout those woods above the Harvest Drive end up there. I had fun growing up. And so now, I'd done my 30 years with the state of North Carolina, I decided, hey, I got a certified rehabilitation counselor degree, a credential. I might as well use it, so I'll draw my state retirement since they won't give me a promotion or anything. Just draw that and then go to work somewhere else. So I applied for a job up in West Virginia. They hired me. And then I got to thinking I didn't want to live up there because it's too cold. So I said thanks after they had me set up to come to work there. And I told him, I said I changed my mind. I wanted to go somewhere south where it's warmer. So I went to Georgia and applied for a job, and Georgia hired me as a rehabilitation counselor. And I went to work for the Georgia Department of Labor Rehabilitation Program in Rome, Georgia. And I worked there for about 3 years. And we were close to Atlanta. My wife did not like being that close to the big city, and she complained every day about all the traffic and everything. And finally, my mother passed away, and we decided we had had enough of Georgia. We decided to move back to North Carolina. Talked to my aunt. She agreed that I could move into my grandfather's old house. She had inherited it. She needed someone to go up there and look after it. So we moved in up there in December of 2007. And we lived in that house for 4 years. And I got a job at Alpha Omega, which was a private mental health company that had taken over after the state had done away with the public mental health program. They hired me as a caseworker, and I loved that work, man. Only problem was it was a private company. They didn't pay anything, not near what I had been making as a state VR counselor. But I was drawing my state retirement, full retirement, and then drawing full pay, so it didn't matter. I was doing what I enjoyed doing, helping people. And I would have stayed with them if they had stayed in business, but they were talking about going bankrupt. So I thought, well, shoot, I better get out of here before they completely go bankrupt. So I resigned and went to work for New River Behavioral Health out of Boone. And I worked for New River Behavioral Health for 3 years. They placed me in the Marion office, and boy, I was in heaven, working out of my own hometown. I'd never done that before since high school. Getting to find old friends and so on. And that was a great job. I love working for New River. And then after 3 years, the county decided that they were not going to renew New River's contract. So everybody was tore up. That meant the company was not going to be able to stay. And I thought, well, I'll save them the satisfaction of letting me go. They wouldn't have, I mean, they had to let me go if they've lost the contract. They can't keep me on. They could have probably transferred me to Boone or somewhere, because I was doing well with them, enjoyed the job. But I decided that, shoot, I'll just retire. I'm old enough now, I can just make it on my retirement. And so we moved. We decided we're going to move to Mexico and live where it's cheaper. My wife had always wanted to live in a Mexican-speaking country. I mean, a Spanish-speaking country. She always enjoyed speaking Spanish, and my son had been a foreign exchange student in Venezuela, and so he wanted to live in a Spanish-speaking country. So we came to Chapala, Mexico in 2011. We bought us a home, and we're getting along fine here. Getting back to radio. Radio has always been my lifelong hobby since the early days when my drunken uncle preacher used to take me to the radio station, and I'd sit in while they did the broadcast. I was just fascinated by radio. I got a 4-transistor transistor radio when I was probably 6 years old, and I kept that for years. I took it to bed with me every night. Listened to all the distant AM radio stations, WLS Chicago, WOWO Fort Wayne, Indiana, WLAC Nashville, Tennessee, the John R. Show. I loved all those programs and loved radio and dreamed of someday growing up being a radio man. And I talked to old Sid Kerrigan, who was WBRM radio man. He said, son, don't do it, you'll starve to death. So I went on to college, but I really wanted to do it. And so during the CB craze in the 70s, Donna bought me a CB radio for my birthday because she knew I'd always been fascinated by radio. That was 1977. She bought me a TRC 48 single sideband CB radio. And I tell you what, I had so much fun with that thing. I loved it. Made so many friends over the years talking on single sideband CB. It's not like the old AM CB. This is more intelligent people. They act more like ham radio operators and carry on intelligent conversations. And that TRC 48 radio from Radio Shack had a built-in power supply, so you could run it on house current, or you could take it and plug it in your 12-volt car system and run it in mobile. So I'd run it mobile with a 103-inch steel whip on the bumper, and then I'd take it out when I got home and bring it in the house, and I put up a 5/8 wave ground plane CB antenna on a 30-foot telescopic mast, and I talked all over the country, stations, foreign stations, everywhere on that CB radio, which I had so much fun with it. But I always had the dream of becoming a ham radio operator because my first cousin who lived in Albemarle, his name was Donald Russell, WA4ASG, Willie April 4 America Sugar George was his call sign. I'd been introduced to ham as a youngster, as a young teenager, but I didn't think I'd be smart enough to learn the Morse code. But in 1980, I started a ham radio class at Moorhead High School taught by Walt Williams on Tuesday nights. And I had to learn that Morse code. Didn't think I'd ever learn it, but once I learned it, I enjoyed it. Had a lot of fun with it. So I've got my novice ticket in February of 1981. My call sign was KA4SXS. And I kept that call for about 3 years until I upgraded to general class and got N4LBW. And I've been N4LBW ever since. And then the few years after that, I upgraded to advanced, and then I upgraded to extra. So I got the extra class. Had to do 20 words a minute to get the extra Morse code course. But ham radio has been my main hobby and still is. I love to communicate with people over long distances. I'm very radioactive. But thinking about back on my life, we've had a good life, a good marriage, 4 children. Oldest, Ryan. The youngest is Aaron. And now we're lucky to be living here in Mexico with my oldest son. Ryan came with us. The others are not here. I have my 2 little grandchildren living with us. Tiffany has a disability, and so we've got custody of her son Logan, who's 9 years old, and little Brianna, who's 2 years old. So they're living with us here in Mexico. And I look back over my life. It's been a good life. Of all the jobs I've ever had, my favorite job was working at the Kingsway Cinema as a projectionist in Eden. I got an evening job there and weekends. After I got off from the prison, I'd go to work at the Kingsway. Most of my adult life, I've had to work 2 jobs in order to pay the bills. But that Kingsway Cinema job was my favorite job. I loved it. I loved the smell of popcorn. I loved the atmosphere. People happy, having fun, enjoying what they're doing. I love eating free popcorn and drinking free Cokes. That was a great job. And I would have done it forever if they'd have given me 40 hours a week and paid me a decent wage, but there's just no money in it. But I loved it. And I guess my second most favorite job was my weekend job as a security guard, an evening job. I got a job in 1984 working at Deep Springs Country Club as a security guard. I was their local rent-a-cop. I had to patrol the golf course and make sure everything was okay. If anybody got drunk or out of hand, I had to bring them under control and all that kind of stuff. But it was a good job. I enjoyed doing it. And while I was patrolling the Deep Springs Country Club, I got to drive my little Nissan Stanza, and it had security guard signs all over it and lights. And I had a 2-meter radio in it, and I'd talk on the 2-meter radio to people all over the place. It was an easy job. I got to talk on the radio and just have a good time. Everybody was having a good time at the country club. I got to meet a lot of famous people. Congressmen were there. Made a lot of friends at the country club. That was Richard Pryor was the congressman from Greensboro, Democratic congressman, and he was a member there. He came there all the time. Well, that was the end of part 2 of my life story. I hope you enjoyed it and hope you tune in for part 3, which will be the end of it. Thank you for listening.